Um, Hi, I'm Les, and my partner and I farm in Colfax, Wisconsin, on Anishinaabe land. We've been here since 2017, and we farm 2 acres, um, no till. The last time we used any kind of mechanical tillage was 2019. For a couple of years, we did use what am I saying, the power harrow on the BCS. So this is a picture of our farm. We sell to 120 member CSA. Well, that was last year. I think we'll be a little smaller this year. A pretty bustling weekend market, one small wholesale account, and we do weekly food bank donations. So that's just a little bit about who we are and who we sell to. And yeah. So, oh, and I just want to say, if people have questions, you can just jump in and ask them as we go. We do not do shallow or deep compost mulching, but we do use a lot of compost throughout the season. Probably 1.5 40-yard loads throughout the year on the 2 acres. We do follow a lot of other things that other no-till farmers do, like interplanting. So here we've got some lettuce, scallions, and cilantro together. Intensive plantings. Here's some broccoli, spaced pretty close together. Perennial strips and cover cropping. And what Rue kind of asked me to talk about today was planting into cover crops. So that's mostly what I'm going to talk about. Although there's a lot of really great books, here are the ones that I happen to own. And reading any of them, I'm sure will give you a lot of great information, but what I've noticed is that the most recently published one is usually the best, is the one that I would recommend if you were going to buy one. And so these are in chronological order, with Jesse Frost's The Living Soil Handbook on top. I read that just this past fall, and it was great. Also, the No-Till Organic Vegetable Farm by Daniel Mays, also really great. Yeah. So potatoes into oats. So we planted oats fall of 2020, and then May 3rd of this past year, 2021, we used the rotary plow to break open a narrow, it opens up about 8 inches wide if you haven't used the rotary plow attachment for the BCS. And so that allows us, if our plants are, we want our potato spacing at about 2 feet, that allows us to open up only 8 inches. And I know that I said that we didn't do any mechanical tillage since 2019. This is the one exception. And I'd love to hear if anybody else has ideas for growing no-till potatoes other than some kind of way to open up the soil and get the potatoes in there. I will say that this method worked really great, and we definitely will be doing this again. So this was just another picture of the oats before anything happened to them. This was taken early spring, and they had gone almost to their point of seeding out before they were frost killed in the fall. And then we went through and basically opened, it doesn't really plow or whatever the soil, but it kind of just flopped open the cover of the oats and held it in place there, if that makes sense. So that we could put in soil amendments, compost, and well, the potatoes first, and then covered with compost. And then we basically just raked the lump back on top of the trench. And so when the potatoes came up, we added additional hay to this oat straw, and that kept it pretty much weed free. I mean, with a few exceptions, definitely. But we did not then hill the potatoes because we didn't have access to the soil to move it on top into hills. But we did make sure that it was really well mulched, and we had very few green shouldered potatoes. And I regret not taking more pictures. So those are the only two that you get of the potatoes, none of the actual potatoes, but our yields were really comparable. Yeah.
Before you move on to the next photo, can you tell us what stage that photo is in? It looks like it's after you planted and you move the mulch back on top of the mound. Is that right?
That's right. So you can see in this, it's just sort of, I mean, maybe you can't see, but it's mostly just flattened oats. And then here it looks like waves of, and that's where we had rotary plowed and then flopped stuff back on top. Mm-hmm. And
Go ahead. Please finish your thought.
Oh, just that I can't see my mouse, and so I can't open the chat. And so would somebody just tell me if people are asking questions that way?
Yeah, I can do that. Or yes, Ruin, I can do that. I had one other question though, not to be a bother, but did you do anything in the fall when, like right before the oats winter killed, to kind of lay them down in a uniform way so that they weren't all hodgepodge on the field?
No, and you can kind of tell that they are kind of hodgepodge. Like,
I mean, they look great to me. So it looked like maybe I'm giving it credit for being orderly.
It looks that way because I took this particular picture, but it wasn't really. And we kind of let the sheep go in there because it's at the very bottom of our field. And I thought, oh, well, the sheep will love to eat these oats, and they just didn't. So that was a bit of a fail, but.
What was the seeding rate on the oats? That's the question coming in.
Very thick. I hand seed all of our cover crops. And so they're probably, if somebody on a larger scale was listening to me or watching me, I'd say seed them, they would probably be pretty like, I don't know. They'd probably
impressed.
Think I was being extremely wasteful, but well, I don't think so. probably pretty judgy, I would think, but it's thick. It's as thick as I can get it because oftentimes birds will eat. I mean, I've not had a great lot of luck with getting thick stands of cover crops. So who knows? But this is then what happened on the right here. It is winter rye. We planted that after the potatoes came out. And on the left, I didn't have a picture only of the winter rye, but on the left is just flail mowed corn. We grow some popcorn just for fun. And so that's what it looks like after I flail mowed the popcorn. And then that's a good segue because the next kind of crop pairing I'd like to talk about is brassicas into winter rye. So we planted
can we actually pause for a minute, Liz? There's quite a few questions. And
oh, great. Yes,
I wonder if we can go over a couple of them. So just since we were talking about oats, Paul was wondering, do you incorporate the oat seed or just make sure it stays moist at establishment?
If it's dry enough to power harrow, in the past I have like power harrowed a 1/2 inch down to incorporate them, but that option doesn't always present itself, especially since we have pretty heavy soil. So I don't know. I'm thinking, so one of the things that Jesse writes about in his book is using a peat moss spreader to spread compost or peat moss on top of seeds so that you don't have to incorporate them. You just kind of cover them lightly. And we've done a little bit of trying to cover crop seeds with remay or frost blanket, but yeah.
So there are two other questions or comments. One is about where you get the compost.
We have sourced compost from two places, Cowsmo in Wisconsin, and also Sioux Landscaping or Sioux something. They sell compost that's made from like it's municipal compost, I think, really, because I've found some random plastic items in there.
Okay.
But it's leaf based.
Yeah.
Where Cowsmo is manure based.
Yeah. And then the other, more of a comment from two different people, was about deep mulch systems, which are often referred to as the Ruth Stout method, where you surface plant the potatoes and then bury them in a deep layer of hay or straw.
Yeah.
Carl was saying that he did that with 2 feet of hay. And I've known other people who've done that. Have you ever tried that?
No, I haven't. So the hay that we have access to is from our hayfield that's just right adjacent to our thing. So it's in round bales, and I have questions for whoever mentioned that, which I've been, I think, a little bit nervous to try that because one, if I roll out a round bale on top of potatoes, and it's thick, do I have to fluff it in order for the potatoes to sprout through? So that's one question. And maybe can they unmute themselves and tell us? Or and then the other question is, if you have a thick mat, do you have to fluff it or what? Because I mean, mostly when we're mulching, we're rolling out round bales.
The 2 people I've known who've rolled out round bales have not fluffed it. They have just rolled it out, and apparently the potatoes came through just fine. Carl,
And then,
do you want to talk about what you did?
Sure. Hi, this is Carl. Hi, Les.
oh, Carl. I thought you said Paul. Hi, Carl.
How you doing?
Good.
So I actually have a property pretty close to Les there, and I just messed around with the lasagna thing. So I got some nasty hay, big squares, and I threw it out. And I actually drove it over the tractor to kind of smash it down. So it was a lot of hay, and it was not nice, clean hay. So I was really worried about that. And then I just actually took a hatchet and cut a groove in the spring and put some compost and just kind of jammed the potatoes down in there. It worked pretty good, but again, similarly, had no way to hill them, and I got a lot of green ones, but I got a lot of potatoes. And I have pure sand, and so the reason there was I don't live there, so I don't get to come out there much, and so it hold the moisture. But I had a lot of grass in the hay, and that was a problem.
And so do you feel like 2 feet of unfluffed hay is what, because when you read the comment that was said 2 feet of hay? Carl, I think you're muted.
It was about that. And then the idea is over the winter, the snow falls and it smashes it down.
Yeah.
It was about that. I ran to a dairy farmer. I used to dairy anyway, but it was nasty, rotten. Some of it was rotten, it was nasty stuff, but it was free. But quite a bit, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hay, not straw, so it has nutrients.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we'll try a row. I've always been really nervous. But I have read about that method.
I think with cleaner hay would work, but again, I had no way to hill it. So maybe you could come in with some, and on a bigger scale, it'd be a lot, but that was the problem. So a lot of greenies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've used straw, but that's in a system where there's regular tillage. But I've used straw as a mulch for potatoes after they emerge. And we put it on at about 10 tons to the acre, which ends up, like, to translate that into a smaller area, I'd say a small square bale, which is about 30 pounds, would cover, I think, about 10 square feet. I'd have to check that.
Mhm.
But the thing about that is that the straw will last through the season. Whereas when I've done that with hay, it's broken down. And so, I mean, that's good in terms of getting the nutrients. But if the main thing is to get the cover, then like straw is nice because it will last the whole season. And because it's not breaking down much, I haven't actually noticed that it ties up any nutrients. But since that's in a system that has tillage, I don't know how it would translate. And that's something I'm really interested in trying to see how that translates.
We only mulched the once, but it was pretty heavy. And so we didn't, I mean, we had a few weeds poking through, but nothing, what we kind of let them get. Our system, I think, for weeding for when we do heavy hay mulch is to just let the weeds get kind of big until we can see them above the crops and then yank them out rather than spending time going through and weeding small weeds. But there were really not that many, even with the one application of hay, but it was pretty thick, I'd say. All right. So, so then the next kind of pairing is big brassicas into winter rye. And I should say that we use the paper pot transplanter on our farm, and we use it as much as we possibly can because we are 2 people farming 2 acres without any large equipment. And so that is the thing that helps us go quickly. But our large brassicas, there's a handful of crops that we plant with a hori. So just basically making a small opening into untilled soil and placing a transplant there. So that's large brassicas, chard. Actually, that's probably just those 2 things. So we planted, and I'm gonna just have to look at these notes here. We planted the winter rye in like late September, I believe, but mowed it June 24th and then put landscape fabric over it for 2 weeks. I'm not super confident in doing like a real kill mowing of winter rye. So I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to come back. So we put landscape fabric on it for 2 weeks to make sure. And then on July 8th, planted broccoli and cauliflower. And it was some of the most beautiful broccoli and cauliflower that we have grown. Definitely the most beautiful cauliflower that we've grown so far. So that was pretty exciting. We also did chard transplants into that. And that also required no weeding, except for as I was harvesting the broccoli, there were lamb's quarters and some other tall ones that had, shot up and gone to seed. And so as I was harvesting, I would just grab the weed and, fling it out of the field, which I don't know really how we would have weeded thoroughly anyway, because there was quite a lot of debris on the ground. And then, gosh, is there anything else that anyone wants to know about that? I wish I had better pictures, but I don't.
Yeah, Dylan, do you want to come off mute and ask your question? Dylan's question is about fertility, the fertility program for the brassicas.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I was just wondering if you applied any fertilizer, how much and how you might have done that for the brassicas, and then also about, I guess, irrigation as well, if you
Yep.
needed to irrigate and how you did that. And if you might have mentioned the planting rate of the rye, but I missed it.
Thick. Thick is the planting rate. I don't know. I'm not our farm record keeper, I will say. The fertilizer we apply, I think we do a mix of, I think it's 6 pounds per bed of 524 sustain fertilizer. And that's just right on top of everything. And then we cover that with a smattering of compost, and we do 10 buckets per bed. And then,
so that's all just sitting on top of the rye?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. And then we did, yeah, and then we have overhead irrigation. We use a wobbler system.
Then there was one other question on the same topic that came in. Can you tell us the plant spacing for the broccoli, cauliflower, and chard?
So I would hesitate to say that our beds are all 30 inches wide, but that's kind of what we're aiming for. And so we do 2 rows in each bed and 18 inches between plants.
And that's consistent for all 3 of those crops. 2
Yeah.
rows, 18. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Mm-hmm. The one brassica that we do smaller than that is, larger than that. Let fewer per bed than that is Brussels sprouts.
Mm.
Okay, so then we also did our fall kale into spring planted oats and peas, and with the same, basically the exact same procedure as into the winter rye. We mowed it, and we did not cover it with landscape fabric for 2 weeks to plant the kales, but we did cover, this is just a nice picture of 2 snakes that I uncovered while we were uncovering the spot that the paper pot transplants were going into. So for the fall kale, this is what it ended up looking like. You can kind of see in this photo the crop debris from the oats and peas, and then the darker stuff that's sort of in amongst that is the compost. And this was, let me escape from this again. So we transplanted this broccoli. It was kale and broccoli, transplanted on July 29th. And this photo was taken on August 8th. So a week, is that right? That's what Elsa's notes say. So I'm going with that. Taken on August 8th. It's a lot of growth, but whatever. It was the height of summer. Maybe that's right. And so to the left where Elsa's working, we had just raked the beds directly left of these in the picture to transplant with the paper pot transplanter. And that was great too, because the couple of weeks under fabric was enough that we could just kind of rake off the rest of the oats and pea debris into the path.
And your soil was loose enough at that point, obviously, to pull the paper pot transplanter through it, which the reason I'm asking is because that seems miraculous to me. Because didn't you say your soil was a little bit heavy?
It's silt. So our soil is very silty. It holds water, but not nutrients.
Got it.
And
okay.
Yeah, and we've been adding quite a bit of gypsum because we're having some tight soil issues. But even in the tight soil, I feel like you can drag a paper pot transplanter. Not in the worst of it, probably, but we never feel like we have to. That's not true. We used to wheel hoe occasionally before using the paper pot transplanter.
With what type of implement on the wheel hoe? Just a stirrup hoe
Yes.
or like
Yeah.
a
Like a
not
12
the Reiki thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
12-inch stirrup hoe. And then the other thing I will say is that because we're not fluffing the soil and we don't, I don't think last year we did really much, if any, wheel hoeing before paper pot transplanting. Sometimes you have to go back and fix some of the soil against so that it's really against the paper pot. I'm thinking about buying the zipper. I don't know if people know that tool. It's a little hand tool. It will open and close a furrow for a paper pot. But I'm sure it's like $200 because it's the way things are. That
is just amazing to me. I am so impressed by that. You just to restate this, because I'm so amazed. You pull off the cover, you pull aside the residue that might be there, and you pull the paper pot. Maybe you wheel hoe before you pull the paper pot. Maybe you don't.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for making that clear.
Mostly don't. And also sometimes big roots get in the way. So if you've had broccoli there or something that with a really thick stem that doesn't like to decay, big brassicas, they're really getting in my way a lot, I will say. Sometimes you get hung up on a root, but it's 100% worth it, I think, to use the paper pot, even if you have to go back and smush the soil against the paper pots. And we're really kind of also trying to push the boundary between just how much we have to do that. And oftentimes I can do it with either a small collinear hoe or the 30-inch Johnny's bed rake, but like in alignment with the thing. I'm trying to do as much as I can of the fixing while I'm standing up, and then also do as little fixing as possible. And as long as you set up overhead irrigation afterwards, don't let you have to treat them like they're still in the greenhouse as far as how you're watering them, especially when it is hot and sunny. So you're basically treating those cells like cells until they've made the jump between where their roots are and getting their roots into the soil that's going to hold water better. So like watering them once or twice a day. I mean, twice would be like, we wouldn't blink our eye at having to water the transplants twice, to just make sure that they're going to put their little roots down into the ground. Twice a day, I mean. Okay. Yeah. So this was the fall kale and broccoli. A few weeks later, or many weeks later, it looks like I'd been harvesting it for a while. But this is what the soil looked like in the fall. So pretty much no evidence. I mean, not no evidence. There's some evidence, but not a lot of the oats and pea debris. We do have some slug issues, so I tried to get a picture in there with a slug damaged leaf that I had discarded, and some small weeds, but none of these weeds made anything before winter. So
Liz, there was a question, since you mentioned slugs, there was a question about another pest. Voles. I forget who asked this question, but they've struggled, it might have been Paul, struggled a lot with voles in their no-till system. Have you had that issue?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Where we had it the worst, where it was sort of a disaster, was when we had transplanted kale into landscape fabric and then covered it with row cover. There was one time we did that, and it was the last time for sure, because the voles just, nobody could see them. And I mean, we lost, probably over half of our spring planting, which in the spring, everything's so dire. If you lose something, it's a really big deal. So now we just, we don't do the landscape fabric part, which is great, because landscape fabric, it's wonderful. And I'm sure if you've ever heard me, blather on about how much better it is than using silage tarps, you may think that I'm the total landscape fabric nut, but honestly, I'd like to use less of it, just like everyone else. It's plastic and it does degrade eventually. And so, once we've kind of got our weeds, especially the quackgrass, under control, I'd like to do a lot more planting into cover crops rather than planting into landscape fabric. That being said, I have one very diligent, aging farm dog that loves to hunt. Also we have a lot of raptors. We've got bald eagles and red-tailed hawks, and lots of, we live near a creek, so there's just lots of hunting that happens in our field, I think. Mostly when we're not there, I would hope. And then, yeah, it just happens. We probably had we planted 3 beds of fall carrots, and they make a very nice canopy under which rodents can come and eat your fall carrots. And out of the, maybe, I think we harvested 600 and some pounds of carrots, I think we had about 60 pounds of us carrots, so carrots that had their tops munched on. So, if they're there, but it doesn't feel like an emergency like it did that time with the landscape fabric. Okay, so this is just another picture of after mowing brassicas, what it looks like. The flail mower is like, it's the one thing that I'm willing to go get the BCS to do. I'd rather not for almost any other task. I'd rather do it by hand, but the flail mower is kind of magic in a way. So that's what it looks like after that. Okay, so other pairings or methods that have worked well for us. Is there any other questions before I kind of, because those were kind of the 3 big pairings that we tried in 2021 and found to be successful on our farm.
No other questions. There's a little bit of discussion on fertility sources in the discussion, and I'll make sure I share that with everyone later, because there's some really good details about what sources people are using for fertility, with a mix of short-term and longer release sources.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so other things that have worked well for us. This was planting into a buckwheat cover crop, some fall salad mix. We did clear off, or try to clear off, most of the buckwheat debris. I did mow it, and so a lot of it ended up on the ground, but then there were still long strands of it. So, and you can see it also seeded itself, and then all that pokey uppy stuff was buckwheat that died in the first hard frost, or first frost that made it into the hoop house. But I'd say that was a big success, and it filled. So this is our greenhouse, which sometimes the left half is full of tables, and then when we don't need that space anymore, then we plant it to something else. But it's nice because we get an early round of something in here, and then there's kind of this empty window, and we don't haven't really known how to fill it. And so this year, for the first time, we actually were able to fill it with buckwheat, which was great. This is just another picture of that first cover slide where there's a mix of weeds and Dutch white clover growing under kale, which has been a really great care for the past 2 years or 3 years, maybe even this has happened. So this is our spring planted kale. And then we seed Dutch white clover into it, and right before we do our first weeding, and then when we hoe it, it incorporates the clover seed, and then we just live with whatever other weeds come up. But that's been kind of a fun one that I have enjoyed. This is what happens when we also had the reason we discovered how much we enjoyed having Dutch white clover underneath kales, because this was an old sheep pasture, and I think that the previous owner did some overseeding of Dutch white clover into the pasture. And so basically the first time, I don't know what exactly the right conditions are, but the first time we create the right conditions for Dutch white clover to germinate and thrive, they come up in like every area. So now we plant it on purpose because I don't mind that it comes up. Whoops, wrong way. So this is what happens when we basically grow a crop. This crop has been harvested and it's winter in this picture, but the Dutch white clover persists after harvesting the crop out of the bed. The blank area on here where you can see the soil, that was the bed, roughly. And then the Dutch white clover is kind of taking over from the paths, and that'll survive the winter and come back in the spring, and then we will occultate it with some landscape fabric and start from fresh. We're not going to try to cultivate living pathways necessarily year to year, because honestly, our pathways move a lot. We're not, geometrically minded enough to have permanent beds, but we try and keep them roughly in the same place. And then this is a picture of our Brussels sprouts with a heavy hay mulch under that. And then occasionally we get it together to make raised beds with the rotary plow on the BCS. And so last year, I think was the year that I took this picture, we just kind of like rolled the hay into a blob into the path, and then it became mulch for the path. So that was kind of something I would repeat if I could. And then here is when we do grow into landscape fabric. This was our hot peppers this year. You can see this was after a hard frost. We came through with loppers, like just big sheer, I don't know, the long kind, so you don't have to stoop over too much, and cut at the base. And then you can see on the right hand side, there's something green growing, and then there is like what looks like a bed of brown things. So there was some spent spinach in that bed, and we threw the 3 beds worth of pepper plants into the one bed. Well, there's not a picture of it, into the one bed, and then flail mowed them. So now there's like we've cleared off we've kind of done 2 things. We've cleared off the landscape fabric so that in the spring we'll take that up, and that's probably one of the first places that we'll plant because it'll be totally clear of things. And then also we've mulched this spinach bed so that it has something covering it for winter. And then here's some things that haven't worked for us. Or are there questions before I go on to that?
Yeah, we have a few questions.
Okay.
So with landscape fabric, one person is thinking of using landscape fabric to smother, I assume to smother cover crops instead of silage tarps, and was wondering why you're going away from landscape fabric. And Kyan, if you wanted to come off mute and explain more about that, feel free.
Yeah, it seemed like you were using that system, but then you said that you're trying to use it less. And I was wondering why.
Yeah, so sorry, I think I was unclear. I'm trying to plant into it less and just use it to occultate, which I find it to be totally up to the task, and I love it. It's perfect because it lets water infiltrate and it's not disgusting like a silage tarp. But I think that planting into landscape fabric, I'd like to move away from, because I would like to just have more organic matter on the soil rather than inorganic matter.
So then there was also a question about where you like to source your cover crop seeds.
Well, Albert Lee Seed is great. And then we have a seed house like 20 minutes from us that buys from Albert Lee and then repackages it under their own name. And so oftentimes we're like, we don't have exactly what we need, and then we just have to drive 20 minutes to this place in Elk Mound and buy something. But yeah, I mean, when we get it together to make an order ahead of time, we buy from Albert Lee.
It's nice having someone 20 minutes away, though.
Yeah, it is. It's very convenient.
And then a couple of questions about, let's see, the supplementary fertility for the brassicas in living mulch. Are you doing supplementary fertility when you have brassicas in living mulch, or is it just what you would do on a normal
No,
bed?
it was just the 6 or 7 pounds of Sustain 524 at planting, and no side dressing, no supplemental anything.
And do you mow that cover during the crop cycle? Sorry, Dylan.
Yeah, you totally can. I think I mowed that one time. The previous year I didn't mow it. It kind of just depends on what's happening with the weeds, I think, of what you would want to do. But you know, if you've got weeds going to seed in there, you should definitely mow it. And if you don't, then personal preference, I guess.
Can you remind us your bed width and length for the sustain context?
Yeah, it's they're 30-inch beds and they're 100 feet long.
And then, are you doing any broad forking or anything like that to break up compaction from foot traffic in your greenhouse before you plant? Or the same question for field beds?
Yes, we do. We definitely do broad fork. And I'd say that that's another one of those things that is really time consuming and arduous. And so we just bought a penetrometer, and I'm very excited to do less broad forking next year. I will say that we always broad fork before carrots, and we always broad fork before big brassicas.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that might change in the future. I think we'll probably always broad fork before carrots, but I'm hoping to get away from always broad forking before brassicas, big brassicas. And that'll just depend on what the penetrometer has to say about our soil.
Mm-hmm.
I did stick it, we bought it in the fall, and I did stick it into we've got 5, I should have shown you in the beginning, but we have 5 blocks, and they're roughly, well, I don't know how they vary how many beds they are, but it's whatever 2 acres divided by 5 is roughly. And then one of the 5, we have never used big tillage equipment, and in the other 4 we had a neighbor with a 4-bottom plow come and open it, and then another neighbor disc it. And in the area that has never had any big equipment driven over it and or been flipped in any way, the penetrometer went in all 3 feet, just like
Wow.
no biggie. So I don't, you know, I'm not saying that that's the only reason, but to me, and then where we had planted onions, which onions I feel like always leave the soil worse than they found it, tighter as far as like tightness, because I think they take a lot of irrigation, and that's and then there's like a lot of bare soil between them, so for many reasons. And then that one had a huge chunk of, you know, vertical space where it was hard to get the penetrometer in, but also it was very dry because, as you know, it was very dry this summer everywhere.
So then one last question, to do with worries about the white clover underseeding competing with the brassicas. How big are your kale plants when you put the clover seed down, and have you ever trialed or seen any evidence of yield differences because of competition?
They are, you know, what's really great is that there is a chart in the no-till, the Living Soil Handbook, the one by Jesse Frost. There's a chart about the critical competition period for vegetables. So I would definitely consult that to answer your question. We've not done side-by-side trials, so I don't know about answering the yield comparison part. And I would say that they're, you know, they're starting to fill in the canopy. So they're, you know, they're a foot or 14 inches tall, probably by that point.
All right, sounds good. And I think I don't see any other questions right now.
Great. Okay, so here's some things that haven't worked for us. So this is a adorable baby Tulsi plant that was planted underneath some, well, this particular picture, it looks like is under rhubarb planting. But in other areas, we had some Tulsi reseed itself and completely take over our leek planting. And we have some other issues with leeks that you can kind of tell there's some kind of disease thing happening. And so, you know, for better or for worse, it wasn't the only thing happening with our leeks, but it definitely strangled them out a bit this year. And we actually thought that we weeded it well enough. And then, you know, late June, it's too late. I mean, too late for us. For us, it's too late. Once we're going to markets and doing the CSA, we can't be weeding the leeks anymore. They're on their own. This is a picture of sorghum Sudan grass that was planted into an early spring broccoli planting. And there was no cover, or actually I did try to put row cover on, but it kept blowing off. And so I think quite a bit of the seeds were eaten. And then you can see the broccoli is growing back. So I mowed it with the flail mower completely to the ground. And most of the plants resprouted themselves from the stalk, and then grew through the sorghum Sudan grass. So I would say that I was not happy with that in general. And then yeah.
I'm a little bit confused about the sequence here. Would you
Sure.
mind just explaining that again?
Yep. So the broccoli went in the spring, probably April 25th or May 5th ish. And then I harvested it out. And then once it was done, I flail mowed it and then scatter seeded or hand broadcast the sorghum Sudan on top and watered it in. And it just it wasn't a good pairing for us, or maybe it was just because it was so dry. And I mean, I definitely seeded the sorghum Sudan heavier than recommended, as I do with all the cover crops that I use. And it just didn't block things out the way that,
What was
people
your
say
goal?
that it does for us.
What was your goal with this cover crop planting? Like, wouldn't the additional broccoli just be additional diversity for that bed? Like, why would that
Yes,
get
but it's also a host plant for things that we have a hard time getting rid of. So we have a little bit of black rot that kind of bounces around the field, and also cabbage loopers. I mean, I don't know. I don't really want, like, our farm rotation is entirely based on our brassica rotation. So when I want brassicas to die, I want them to die and never come back. Basically, and that didn't happen. Whereas if I had covered it with landscape fabric instead of planting a cover crop, it would have happened, because that's what we usually do. But I guess it did grow me some organic matter, and I did mow it, and we'll see how it is to plant into in the spring. So I don't know.
I know you can't see the chat, so I'm telling you that Kyan left a smiley face and LOL in the chat. So I think
Okay.
I think a lot of us appreciate the difficulties of well, especially of black rot.
Yeah, I just don't know why so many people want to eat so many brassicas. But anyway, that's just my own rant. Oh, that's the end. So I'm gonna stop doing the screen share. How do I? Oh, right there. Great. I can see here.
All right, thank you so much, Liz. That was really great.
Yeah,
It was a fast hour. That didn't feel like an hour.
oh my gosh, it was exactly an hour.
Yeah.
That did not feel like an hour. That went very quickly.
Great.
So thank you. Yeah, I think we can open it up. If there are any more questions, people should feel free to unmute and jump in. So looking at the chat, Brad Wismuller has a question. Have you had any regrowth of cover crop from flail mower in a problematic amount?
No, but like I said, when we did the winter rye, we covered it for 2 weeks before planting that the brassicas and the chard into there. And on the edge where there was like a little gap between landscape fabric, and it was at the edge of our field, which all of our fields have landscape fabric on the very last bed to stop the quackgrass from entering the farm. But where they had, made a little gap, there was some regrowth of winter rye. So I'm glad that we did, and it seemed like 2 weeks was enough.
When you're using the landscape fabric to occultate, how long do you have to leave it on, and does that change based on seasonality and sun and everything?
Yeah, it does. We the 2 weeks was great. That's probably the first time we've ever only had it on for 2 weeks. So 2 acres, we're really trying to rein it in a little bit. 2 acres is more than we should really be growing, probably, for just 2 people farming. I'm going to try and hire somebody to help us this year, but as far as I have heard, it's hard to find a person that will stick with you for a whole season. So, or at least that's word on the street. But yeah, so we also use it, occultation, as a placeholder. So yeah, 3 weeks is kind of probably our average. 2 weeks I was impressed that it was probably because we had transplants that were planned for that area that needed to go in. But that's probably the shortest amount of time I've ever left landscape fabric on.
Rufus had a question about some of your favorite tools.
Well, I mean, definitely the paper pot. That's 100% the reason that we can do what we're doing. Other than that, if you already have a BCS, then the flail mower is really great for, killing cover crops. Although I will say there's some great, there's, a lot of farms out there that are doing sort of a stepper crimper, if you will, using like a T-post attached to people's feet to crimp cover crops. And so that seems like a great idea if you don't already have a BCS, because they're really expensive. So yeah, the paper pot, we use Hori Horis for transplanting, but I'm pretty excited about, I just got the like ash dibble from Johnny's, which I feel like is going to feel nicer than my cruddy old Hori that I've had for 15 years. Yeah, but there's really just not a lot of tools that we use.
I had a dibble custom made by a woodworker friend of mine that is sized perfectly to match my plugs. And that is by far the fastest time
Right.
the upgrade. So I've got 3 different sizes based on my plug size.
Oh,
I just go through and boom, 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 come back, drop plugs in, and I'm gone.
wow. And is it
don't have a
square?
lab.
What's
What'd you say?
that? Is it square?
No. I use the wind strip trays whenever I can, which are, like you said, very expensive from everything. But the dibbler, it's a T-handle that is a round post, and then it tapers. So it easily inserts into my soil, but the width of it is sized perfectly to the plugs. And so if I want to go deeper and then fill it up with either compost or amendments, I can, or I can just do a shallow one and then drop my plugs right in. But yeah, a wooden dibbler that's sized well saves a lot of time.
Yeah. Since you mentioned propagation stuff, another thing that I'm really into is the non-chained paper pots, which are available from, is it Small Farm Central? And they're really nice. We've got, a bunch of plastic 72s and 128s, but we're trying to transition, since we use so many paper chained pots, we're trying to transition all of our non-paper chained pots into these non-chained paper pots. People, I'm just saying the same word over and over again. But anyway, it fits in the hard plastic tray that the paper pot ones come, but they come in 128, 72s, and 50s, and the 50s are like a 2.5-inch square. And so you get a lot of the same benefits of like soil blocking, but you don't have to make soil blocks, which is great. And I've seen roots grow through the paper. So I don't know. It feels way better than plastic, and you don't have to, the paper pot trays are really easy to wash and sanitize. Whereas, you know, the traditional plastic plug trays are not.
I'm new to cover crop stuff. For things like rye and that overwinter, does it have to be crimped specifically, or can it be cut and then smothered? I don't
No,
have a
it
flail
can-
mower either.
Yeah, it can be cut and smothered, which is exactly what the flail mower is doing. It's just cutting it, and then above where it cut it off the plant, it's also chopping it up. But you could probably scythe it if that was something that you had. Or
That's what I was wondering, if I could scythe it and then just cover it with landscape fabric after that.
I would assume so. I don't know how close to the ground you'd want to scythe it. I mean, as close as possible, but when I'm scything grass, I rarely get a very slow cut. So I don't know.
Someone
I
made a
ask that-
comment. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll just quickly read a comment from the chat, Kelly. So Linnea said that they have a jab planter for brassicas that they got from Japan, and that prevents them having to bend over. And also they had a question about whether there's a lot of residue left from the paper pot transplanter, like the paper. If that
Yeah,
is it.
there is some, definitely, but we don't, I mean, you know, it's paper, it's going to degrade anyway. I know that there's some back and forth about the glue that they use or whatever, being certified organic or not, but I think it currently is, and we're not currently certified organic, so I feel like it's worth it for us to do it, but we don't worry about cleaning it up.
Can I ask my question now?
Hi.
Hi, Les. I'm another neighbor in Otter Creek. But I was wondering, since we didn't plan for this in the fall, what would you recommend, like, doing first thing in the spring? And is there anything, like, I know we could start after a first round of something, but could we start with a cover crop in a small area for a later planting?
Yeah, so the oats
Over.
and peas that we did were spring planted at the end of or mid-April, probably because it was so warm this April. And that was great, and that timing worked out well for our fall kale.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Liz.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I want to respect people's time. I see that we're a bit past the hour, and that hour did go really quickly. That was a very fascinating conversation. So I really appreciate everyone for being here, and especially Les for leading that discussion. We're going to have another discussion next month, which is going to be led by Rufus, who is on the call today. Hey, Rufus. So hopefully you'll all be able to join us again then. We'll get the recording from today up on our website and share that as soon as we can as well. So if there are any details that you missed, it'll be available, and we'll put our notes up too. So thanks again, everyone. Stay warm, and hopefully we'll see you again next month.
Thanks, Les.
Yeah, thank you guys. That was fun.